today.
Yes.
Members, it being 11 o'clock, I'll call the LBO Oversight Commission meeting to order. And I think what I would like to do is acknowledge that we have a new member. Representative Scott has filled the position of Representative Albright, retired earlier than the end of session. So anyway, Representative Scott, we're happy to have you.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, thank you. And maybe just informally, maybe go around and just introduce everybody for those who may be watching at home or paying attention. Go ahead.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members. I'm Anna Mingy. I'm the State Budget Director with Minnesota Management and Budget. And so this is my first meeting of the commission.
Mr. Chair and members, my name is Emily Adrians. I'm also newish to this commission. I am the House Chief Fiscal Analyst, and I replaced Bill Marks for those of you who I haven't met yet.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Eric Nauman, Senate Fiscal Staff.
State Representative Steve Elkins.
State Representative Peggy Scott.
Senator John Marty.
And Senator Melissa Wickland.
Representative Jerry Hurtas.
Senator Mary Kiffmeyer.
Representative Mahmoud Nur.
Very good. Well, the first item on the agenda is to review and approve the minutes of February 5th, 2021 meeting minutes.
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Kiffmeyer. This just requires a voice vote. Any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. At this time, we'd like to introduce the LBO Director, Michelle Weber. She's the LCC Executive Director, and she'll just kind of give an overview of what the LBO has been doing in terms of search for a permanent director for the LBO office. Ms. Weber.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members. I'm Michelle Weber. I'm the Executive Director of the Legislative Coordinating Commission. And one of the responsibilities that I have as the Director of the Legislative Coordinating Commission is to help facilitate the process of filling any director level positions for joint offices and commissions. And so over the last several months, I've been working on the posting and recruitment process associated with the LBO director position, and we'll walk through a bit of a timeline and the process for all of you today, and also happy to answer any questions. The position was posted in early July for a minimum of 21 days. We posted it in several local and national associations, as well as career opportunity websites, personalized emails to individuals who might have the experience and qualifications for the position. Some of the national associations that we targeted working with included NCSL, as well as NASBO, which is the National Association of State Budget Officers, due to the work of this position. We received 20 applications for the position, and a panel that was comprised of nonpartisan staff from the House, the Senate, the Office of the Legislative Auditor, as well as the LCC, reviewed and screened the applicants for their qualifications and invited in 3 qualified candidates for first round interviews. Those first round interviews were conducted the first week of August. And as a result of that, the interview panel recommended some finalists to advance to an interview panel that was representative of the Oversight Commission. Prior to the interviews by the panel of individuals from the Oversight Commission, reference checks were conducted, as well as review of the candidates for any partisan related activities. The selection committee from the LBO Oversight Commission included the chair, Senator Kiffmeyer, Senator Wickland, and Representative Newer, and they met with the finalists on Monday of this week. That resulted in the recommendation that they are bringing before you today. The appointment of the LBO director is somewhat similar to the appointment of the legislative auditor. It's governed by statute, and this oversight commission has the authority to make that appointment for a term of 6 years. And so that's the item that's before you all today, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have about the process.
Thank you, Ms. Weber. Any questions from members about the process that's been followed so far? Okay. Well, with that, I guess we can invite the candidate that would move forward, Mr. Christian Larson, to the testifier table. Welcome, Mr. Larson, and if you would just state your name for the record, please.
My name is Christian Larson. I'm the interim director here at the Legislative Budget Office.
Well, thank you very much. Well, I want to welcome you to the committee, and I want to thank you for the work that you've done so far as interim director of the LBO office. Members, this is an opportunity at this time. The select committee met on Monday and asked the candidates different interview questions, and you're certainly welcome to ask any questions at this time of the candidate.
Mr. Chair, I understand that the interviewers were all impressed.
Very good. Thank you, Senator Marty. Any questions from members? Representative Scott.
I'm the newbie, but I'll go ahead and ask. I'm just wondering, you have an extensive resume here, so I don't doubt your qualifications. Of course, one of the reasons that the LBO was established, it was established to be a nonpartisan entity. And I'm just wondering if you could speak to any issues regarding partisanship that you might have or might be known for. If you could speak to the issue of partisanship, that would be helpful for me. Thank you.
Chair Hertas and Representative Scott. So I've built my career in the nonpartisan sphere. That's really where I wanted to get into. I came out of a public policy school, came from an economics background in undergrad to a public policy school so that I could get into economic research analysis from a very much a research standpoint. And then I spent my career at public universities in public finance at those universities, and then with the Missouri Department of Economic Development in their research information shop so that I could do nonpartisan research in that regard. And then when I came to Minnesota, found a job here at the Legislative Budget Office doing very similar work so that I can spend my time focusing on the nonpartisan objective analysis. And that's really where I like to hang my hat. There shouldn't be anything in my background that would be anything to the contrary.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other members? Representative Elkins.
I'm going to muster a question here. So, Mr. Larson, when I was first elected 4 years ago, one of the things that I initially kind of dived into and worked on with Ms. Weber when she was at the head of the LBO was a significant reform of the way IT projects in particular were estimated. And a lot of that work ended up in the current LBO manual. That was, I think, a very productive working relationship between me and the LBO staff. But in the last, in the last most recent session, I've had, some significant frustrations with, some of the working assumptions that are made in the process right now that I think still need further reform. And the one case that really got under my skin was a case where we were trying to estimate an impact of a provision on the state's state employee health plan, CGIP. And I'm sure Ms. Mingy is probably familiar with this one as well. But an assumption was made that well, first of all, one of the first thing that bugged me right off the top of the head is that when the request for the fiscal note went through MMB to CGIP, they basically farmed it out to the incumbent pharmacy benefit management vendor for the plan, for the CGIP plan. And the vendor basically said, came back and said that, you know, if you implement this provision, you'll violate the terms of our current contract and you'll lose $25 million a year in drug rebates. And when I observed that that contract would be expiring before the law went into effect, I was told, no, it doesn't matter. We still have to use that assumption. And then the legislature subsequently passed a law that implemented a reverse bidding process for the PBM contract for CGIP, which basically rendered that footnote fiscal note moot anyway. And I was, you know, very, very perturbed at the fact that that MMB basically allowed a vendor with a 100% conflict of interest to essentially create the fiscal note, and was also extremely perturbed that the way that the policy was interpreted, such that that fiscal note was going to be applicable, even though the contract in question would expire before the law came into effect. That particular bill was put through the mandate review process that goes through the Commerce Department. And the commerce analysis basically said that for commercial plans, equivalent commercial plans, the impact would be virtually nil. So that's a topic that when we meet in earnest, you know, next session, that I'm going to definitely want to revisit.
Representative Hertaus and Representative Elkins. Sorry, Chair Hertaus.
Mr. Larson, yes.
So this is certainly one that we spent a lot of time talking about. We knew it was an issue. We know that that concern exists, and we know that having the PBM write an estimate on its own estimate is a difficult situation, right? That it seems like it is a conflict of interest that providing that. We also are working within the standards and procedures that we have set in place, and we also have to think of what is a reasonable estimate given we don't know the future, right? And so with that, we sat down with municipal management before the session started last year and said, let's talk through this again and really understand why the fiscal note said what it said, where can we improve it, and what changes can we make? And certainly not to say the fiscal note that came out is exactly how it's going to turn out, but it followed the process we had in place at the time. I think we do need to relook at that, right? Say, is this the right process we have? Is there better ways for us to make estimates on these things that are really hard to tell in the future what the impact is going to be? What other research can we use to utilize that? But the current process is the agencies that's going to implement the bill is the writer of the fiscal note. And so what we do is analyze for accuracy and reasonableness. And that one is a particularly challenging one of what is accurate and reasonable. I think we need to continue to look at that particular note.
Yeah, I think that's, Mr. Chair, yeah.
Representative Elkins.
Yeah, a perfect example of the kind of an issue that this committee was, you know, created to examine. And I would hope that we examine that policy next year.
Thank you, Representative Elkins. Other questions? Or Senator Kiffmeyer?
We have a hand down there.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Larson, I'm wondering if you could share a little about your perspective on partnering with state agencies, as you are very aware the work and the success of the LBO relies heavily on working with state agencies. And I'd be interested to hear if you have thoughts on sort of your approach and perspective on building those relationships.
Yeah, Mr. Larson.
Chair Hertaus and Ms. Miggy. I think, so if we think about how the fiscal process is developed, we are extremely reliant on the partnerships with agencies and the different organizations that complete fiscal notes. And so that is a vital piece to our success. I think that we invest a lot of our time in those partnerships. We've done surveys with our stakeholder groups. With following session, we did a survey with members and fiscal staff and agencies and the budget division. And what we found is the area that we say that is most successful is our communication between fiscal staff and agencies, that we rank quite high on that. And that is where we make our investments. When we think about where we talk about, we put our time when we do our training to get staff ready. That's where we put our focus, that communication, that coordination that happens between agency and committee staff is really where we need to hang our hat, because we're not the writers of the fiscal notes, right? We're the approvers of the fiscal notes. And so making sure that those investments with agencies are important. I think we certainly can always grow on that. I think about opportunities for us to making sure that we are understanding how different things that we're doing impact agencies, I think is important. I also think continue to communicate to legislators and getting better at that part of the communication as well is really important for us. So I think we are an oversight body of the fiscal process, but we're also very much a coordinating body. And so building those relationships so that coordination can take place is absolutely vital.
Thank you, Mr. Larson. Other member questions? Senator Kiffmeyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Mr. Larson, probably one of the things that is most important to me is the fact that the budget office, legislative budget office, and especially when you're doing fiscal notes, has a lot to do with the bill draft itself, which is done by the chief author of the bill. And the intent of the bill is really known most by the chief author, not by the agency, not by even the legislative budget office. They take the plain face language of the bill, but on occasion we have known that our intent is not clear enough or has been interpreted in a way that the bill author did not intend. Could you comment on how you determine the chief author intent when there are questions of interpretation? Because really the whole driving force of this is the language of the bill. And so could you speak to that and how you clarify that if there is a question, and not just a question by the LBO or a question by the agency, but a question by the chief author, which says, wait a minute, those assumptions or that interpretation is not in line with the intent of myself as a bill author or any legislator. Could you address that issue and comment to that?
Thank you, Senator Kiffmeyer. And the assumptions are always an important part of any fiscal note. Mr. Larson.
Chair Hurtas and Senator Kiffmeyer, thanks for the question. I would say to both you guys' point, the assumptions drive everything in the fiscal note, right? And so the assumptions based on the bill language is really going to drive whatever comes out of the fiscal note. In terms of when there's maybe disagreement or when we need clarification on intent of the bill, we do have standards written down about when there is those questions of intent, or that when we're aware that those questions exist, that as we track hearings and the discussions around policy topics, that we try to make sure we're aware that this seems to be the intent of the bill author, and this is how the fiscal note is coming out. And when those aren't in congruence, it's per our standards, it's the legislative budget office's responsibility to come forward and try to have that communication happen between those parties, or inform the parties that maybe unalignment of intent and application, at least as proposed in the fiscal note, are not in alignment. Certainly there's times when we don't catch that. I think we can continue to grow and become better at that. As we become better policy experts in our areas, we've become more established as an office, but also in communicating to members and member staff about intent, and maybe asking on the front side more often, as opposed to having it being caught after a fiscal note gets published. So I think that is something we can invest in, but it is something that we are currently also trying to make efforts with. That is something as we go through our process, when we go through and analyze a fiscal note, or what fiscal note comes in, those are questions we're asking ourselves every time.
Thank you, Mr. Larson. Follow up?
Yeah, I do want to do follow-up. I think for members of the commission, legislators in general, this is a really, really important area. And I've often felt really sad that the fiscal note, all that work, and it'll come through and like, wait a minute, that was not my intention. But now you've gone through all this process, you have a bill hearing, and then that becomes an issue. I really think our standards and our process should have an opportunity midway where there would be a check with the bill author, and not just through staff, but I think the opportunity with staff, yes, but through the LBO, through the fiscal analysts, in a coordinated effort, directly meeting with the bill author and saying, okay, here's what we've got on the initial kind of a thing, and take a look at this, and these are the assumptions and so on. Is this in keeping with your intention? And if not, if yes, great. And if not, what needs to be done to make it more clear? Because the whole purpose of a bill is to convey change in the law that would be in line with the author of the bill. And I think there should be a middle point. And I think you've seen that, Mr. Larson, along the way as you've been in the LBO, that is not necessarily very common, but it does occur. And it's always, when it does happen, it really gums up the legislative process, the committee hearings, and the lag of time and other things. So I just want to speak to that, to members, to consider that. And for you, Mr. Larson, that a process be included. I've advocated for that before, and I think it needs to go into the next process that we have. And so I will conclude my remarks in regards to that, Mr. Chair. But I also wanted to make a comment in support of you, Mr. Larson, in regards to your skills and qualifications. One of the things that I noticed that I thought was very important, because a new duty of the LBO office is going to be the tax expenditures area. And so, Mr. Larson, you've already begun that work. Appreciated seeing that and seeing that happening. I think the commission needs to have more exposure to that, but especially in your history and your experience, it is with fiscal note having to do with state tax credits. So you have that experience and bring that forward, which is a critical thing, you know, at this time. And so I want to commend you for that, commend you for your past work during a new office. That's always a challenging time. You've stepped into being the acting director and have done a commendable job under a COVID situation, other things like that. And I just want to really commend you for your work during that time. For members, those of us who know when you've succeeded coming through a trial by fire, you actually have an opportunity to have a future executive director who's actually come through that, and you get to see that. And then you don't always get to do that. Sometimes you make an appointment and there is an expectation and a recognition of that. But here you really had somebody who's come through that. And so, Mr. Chair, if there are no other.
I do have a question.
And okay.
Representative Noor, do you have a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think we've had death by fiscal note from Senator Kiffmeyer. I think it's something that we need to be looking into. And also the question about classification of fiscal notes, you know, when does it become public when it's an official fiscal note? Sometimes we may use tools to help us to make sure that we understand and make sure that we can make those changes. And who has got that control? I know we introduced the bill to try to clarify that, but nevertheless, I think there's a need to have that clarified. How do you handle the classification of an official fiscal note? Just wanted to know what process will you be putting in place to ensure that confidentiality and also making sure that we are able to understand things before we bring forward.
Thank you, Representative Noor. Mr. Larson.
Chair Hurtas, excuse me, Chair Hurtas, Representative Noor, thanks for the question. So this is again something that we think a lot about, is how the classified fiscal note process, and something that we want to make sure that we're respecting as classified information and private data. So the Uniform Standards and Procedures state that classified fiscal notes only become public when they are then released in some kind of public format, whether that be the fiscal notes released by the member itself, or the bill language that it was written on was released in some official public forum. So that's the official determination of when that fiscal note would become public. There is discussion, and there has been discussion among this commission about how agencies can interact with that, and specifically how municipal management budget can interact in that process. Currently, the interpretation, there's two kind of interpretations out there at this moment. Minnesota Management Budget is citing kind of very broad statutory authority that says they are the fiduciary of the state. And in doing so, or in being so, have the ability to see classified fiscal notes as they're being developed so that they can help inform the fiscal note and to make sure it's as accurate as possible. The portions of the legislature has come out and stated that that is not the case. That's only agencies assigned to a classified fiscal note can have access to that information as it's being developed. And until it becomes public, only those agencies, the member in the legislative budget office, have access to that information. We operate under that latter assumption that only the agencies assigned. That's the information that we share with agencies, that they are to make sure that they maintain the confidentiality of the note, and only agencies assigned to have that authority. We act on behalf of the legislature. And so if the legislature says this is how they want that to happen, and so long as that's a legal interpretation, that is how we will operate. I think there's merit in the idea that Minnesota Management Budget has a role in understanding how certain things happen in the state budget. So I think that's not entirely out of place. But I think that so long as the interpretation is that the intent is that members are not wanting to have that shared with any agency outside of those assigned to it, then that's how the legislative budget office operates. And in terms of how we put that into process, if there's ever circumstances where we find that information has been shared outside of that process, we will share that with the committee staff that made the request, because we don't know the author of classified fiscal notes, that they can then share that with the bill author, and then steps can be taken. They can take steps to rectify that situation.
Thank you, Mr. Larson. Follow up?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Larson. I think part of our conversation, we talked about the common purpose, shared values. Just wanted to thank you for putting that forward, your management style. Just wanted to quickly ask you how many staff right now work under LBO?
So
Mr.
currently,
Larson.
oh, I'm so sorry. Chair Dawson, Representative Noor. So currently we have 11 staff. If I'm thinking about this right, I think we have 11 currently staff, but we are budgeted for 18. So we've added we were appropriated funding for 5 additional staff to support the Tax Bench Review Commission. We have moved some current staff to really focus on that as that work is picking up. And so that means we have some open budget analyst positions that will predominantly focus on fiscal notes. We also have a couple open positions within the Tax Bench Review Commission work where we have 5 open positions at this time. So we have up to 18, but currently I think we have 11.
Thank you, Mr. Larson. Other members? Representative Scott.
Thank you for allowing me a second question, Chair Hertas. I just want to dovetail on Representative Noor's line of questioning regarding the confidentiality of either an official or unofficial fiscal note. And I guess my question might be a little more technical, or maybe not. In a situation where that information was breached through an agency, that they let it get out that this bill, a particular bill, was being worked on, how would your office go about rectifying that, in your view? Or is that something that you would have the legislature investigate? How would you handle a situation like that?
Thank you, Mr. Larson.
Chair Hertas, Representative Scott. So we've had that situation happen a couple times. In those situations, what we do is we notify the agency of the breach and say this, based on this statute and this interpretation of the statute, that's a breach of classified data. We then follow up with the requester. So the actual process of how classified fiscal requests come in, it comes from a fiscal analyst, right, that works for a committee, and we don't know who the bill author is, so we can't speak directly to the bill author that it's classified even to us who's making that request. So we inform the fiscal analyst who made that request, and then they inform the bill author, and then it's the bodies of the House or the Senate's prerogative of how they move forward with that.
Follow up.
Thank you, Chair Hertas and Mr. Larson. So how did you trace it? How did you know if there were multiple agencies that were providing a fiscal note? How would you determine which one leaked it?
Mr. Larson.
Chair Hurtas, Representative Scott, the situations in the past have been, maybe someone got copied on email that wasn't among the agencies or something like that. That's how we've found out in the past.
Okay, thank you.
So Chair Hurtas, so
Representative.
how would you find out if it wasn't a situation like that? That if an employee within an agency leaked it out, some way, is there an investigative way to find out that information?
Mr. Larson?
Chair Hurtas, Representative Scott. So the situations that we've had this come across, there wasn't like some public, hey, this fiscal note is out there. It's just that we have noticed that a communication took place between the agency assigned and maybe an agency not assigned. So that was the situation. There's never been like some public, hey, this fiscal note is out there, or this communication came out with this number that would have only been known through a fiscal note. The only reason we had known about it is because of an email that we were copied on. So in terms of an investigative response, we don't have a process in place for that, nor do we actively look for that information. We're aware, and certainly when there's information around fiscal notes, we try to be aware of that in any specific place that it might be, but we are not actively looking or investigating that until we have a reason for that, until we are informed, until it just comes to us.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Other questions, any other members? I have members, a couple of comments on some of the things that have been said, and I like what Representative Noor said, death by fiscal note. That's the whole reason the OBO was kind of created, because many folks oftentimes felt that the fiscal notes that were coming through were a partisan way of an agency or the executive branch to kill a bill. And so it's really important that this has been a multi-pronged, multi-year effort. And I'm going to lead into something that you and I have talked about during the previous session. There was a period of time that fiscal notes seemed to be getting clogged up in the pipeline, and some of that, at least to be generous, was what appeared to be recalcitrance on the part of an agency of providing you the information, that it took an inordinate amount of time for cooperation. And you and I discussed that, and I was most pleased that you had embarked on an initiative to improve the dialogue and improve the communication and obtaining the information that you needed to do a fiscal note. That being said, I am aware that the LBO doesn't really yet have a full statutory power to go ahead and get information if people aren't cooperating with you. So do you have some ideas, or do you have some suggestions or something that this committee should be aware of and that should be on our horizon in terms of truly giving you that independence and autonomy to produce a fiscal note if you should have somebody who's not cooperating?
Chair Hurtas.
Mr. Larson, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So the specific situation that you were speaking to, where we really had a challenge of getting fiscal notes completed, I think there was it was a time where resources were tight, as they often are, and then also maybe some miscommunication. Also, there was a prioritization that says we need to do this at this point in time, given the point in history where, but at the same time, there's a statutory obligation to complete fiscal notes for agencies and for the legislative budget office. And so we tried to handle that situation. In terms of, and I guess I want to start also by saying that agencies work very hard on fiscal notes. That's a lot of request that we have a lot of requests of agencies, and so it's a big ask for sure, but it's also an understood responsibility. And so that's kind of where we come from. Also, when we think about how the fiscal note process was set up, and often when you think about how you develop processes, you want to align responsibility and authority, that those two things tend to need to be tied together, and that the fiscal note process isn't necessarily set up that way in terms of how the legislative budget office operates in that regard, that agencies, so if we think about the whole full process, the committees more or less drive the volume and the timing of fiscal notes. And so the legislative budget office does not really handle that aspect of the fiscal notes, which drives a lot of capacity of agencies. If the volumes are up, that's going to drive timeliness and things of that nature. On the input side, agencies and other state institutions are really the inputters of information to fiscal notes, and the legislative budget office then analyzes and approves that information. And so we don't have a lot of authority in the process, and for good reason, right? That if you think about, we have to produce a lot of these in 8 days or less, you're going to want to go right to the source and say, you're the ones that are creating, you're going to have to input this process. How are you going to do it? That's the quickest way to get that information. It would take more steps for the legislative budget office to reach out, ask for the information, collect it, understand the program, and put together an estimate. With that being said, that does misalign. We have the statutory obligation to provide the legislature with the fiscal impacts of proposed legislation. And so there's a misalignment that we have this responsibility without much access to make change within the system, because we're reliant on agencies to input and on committee staff to handle volume and timing and things like that. And again, it all makes sense in how that's developed. It's just the reality of that system. And so to your question, are there times when it would be helpful for the legislative budget office to have access to information, say, okay, we're having a really hard time getting this particular fiscal note completed. Again, it's a rare situation where we're getting to a point where we would like to interject at that time. But I think for the legislative budget office to have the authority maybe it needs within the system, there might be times where if we have the authority to ask agencies to provide information expertise to complete a fiscal note that tends to be a hard one to get done, then that might be useful. And I don't think it would happen often, very rare. For the most part, agencies are very responsive in terms of our workload and the responsibilities they have in the fiscal process. But I think that is when we talk about aligning responsibility and authority, I think that is something to consider for the commission.
Thank you, Mr. Larson. And members, to be clear, what I was referring to, there's been so much during this disruption in the way we normally do business with COVID. At a minimum, you could kind of get the sense that we're short-staffed. We don't have people here. You're not a priority. And I hope that would not be the case, that the LBO that's trying to do the work of the legislature and provide the fiscal notes, that agencies take the request seriously and give it priority. I also wanted to comment about the comments that Senator Kiffmeyer made with regard to tax expenditures. I view this as an important complement to the work of the LBO. And so much of that work can be done when they're not doing fiscal notes in the off season. So I think it's a great compliment, but more importantly, our constituents and our taxpayers are demanding transparency and accountability as to the ideas that come out of this legislature, that they're actually being effective and that they're actually producing results. And so to that end, I think the whole idea of Minnesota taking on a more serious role and participation in reviewing tax expenditures and knowing that the incentives that are in that law are actually producing the results that were intended. So I hope as this body goes forward that we'll continue to get encouraging news just about that. And many of us are retiring, so that will be passed on to the next, passing the torch, so to say. So with that, if there are no other questions or comments, I would entertain a motion. Oh, I'm sorry.
Mr. Chairman, with your permission, just maybe one more question from Mr. Larson. Mr. Larson, are there ways that the LBO Commission itself can help the work of the LBO?
Mr. Larson.
Chair Hertas and Mr. Nauman, thank you for the question. I think as we think how the Oversight Commission can support the work of the Legislative Budget Office, I think having conversations around some of the topics that were brought up today, I think is really important. I think that trying to figure out where the friction points are in the fiscal process and see what can or cannot be done to address those. I think it's important that we make sure that we provide you information, that we come back and report on what information we have about the work that's happening in our office. I think that's important for you to see and then respond to. But I think the biggest support is that when there's tension points in the fiscal process or now the Tax Review Commission and all these different things, if there's tension points, having the commission have a public forum to discuss those, I think is really useful. To a lesser probably need, but also an important thing, I think having an ability to escalate when there are problems. If that ever comes to a case, there has to be some way for us to, if we have a kind of a, don't have authority in the process, we have to have some process to be able to move forward when there is issues of not getting fiscal notes or whatever else it might be. Again, it's rare, doesn't happen often, but there needs to be some kind of format for us to move forward and making sure that those things are addressed. I would say that's the biggest role of the Oversight Commission, at least in support of our office.
Thank you, Mr. Nauman.
Thank you,
Follow
Mr.
up?
Chair. No, I think that's a useful thing for the commission to hear.
Yeah, very good. Thank you. Any other questions? So to my previous comment, I'll entertain a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Kiffmeyer.
I will go to motion, but I did also want to make one additional comment. There was a word before that you used, kind of a partnership, with the agencies and working together in fiscal notes. I certainly understand that, but I also feel that it's really important to make a statement that this is a legislative budget office. It is legislative. There's a separation of powers, and we really need to recognize that strength that comes from, first and foremost, it is about the legislature that the LBO works on behalf of, working with a nonpartisan fiscal staff within the Senate, and then also working with the agencies in regards to gathering of the data. It was never intended to be a rubber stamp in the sense of just taking what you get, passing it through. It was meant to be to develop a really critical, in the best sense of the word, of critical analysis of the assumptions and the data, verification, gathering input in a much more active kind of role on behalf of the legislature. And the strengthening of that, I think, to members of the commission is really important to kind of, we started it just like we've had the revisor's office. That was a new agency within the legislature. We've had a couple of those that we've had also in strengthening that. I think that's been a really, really important step in doing that. And I think you recognize that. I think the word was maybe used not in that sense of doing that, but I think you do truly have that understanding, Mr. Larson. And so I really appreciate it. And with that, Mr. Chair, I would make a motion that the commission appoint Christian Larson as the director of the Legislative Budget Office for a term of 6 years as provided under Minnesota statutes 3.8853 subdivision 2, effective August 17th, 2022, at the salary determined by the executive director of the Legislative Coordinating Commission and approved by the chair.
Thank you. Any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, voice vote is all that's necessary. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Welcome aboard, Mr. Larson. And thank you for your appointment. Members, there are future meeting topics. The OBO is in the process of updating the uniform standards and procedures, which will require approval by the full commission. I'm not certain if that will be completed before year's end. I would encourage other members, if you have other business items that you think are worthy of a meeting, certainly forward them to either myself or Michelle. Question, Senator Marty.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Not a suggestion for a new meeting, but I appreciated Mr. Larson's having said in his letter, begun a review of enacted legislation to determine accuracy of fiscal note estimates. I'm not sure, I mean, you've been doing it for a year or so now. I'm not sure if you have any results of that, but I'd be just curious if the office could. I don't know that that requires a meeting, but I'm just curious how it tracks with what the estimates were originally. And then I guess I have, it's not a topic for a meeting, but just a question that maybe Mr. Larson or somebody could do, and that is that number of fiscal notes, and I see how fast they get done and everything else, but we've been having fewer and fewer bills and more stuff in the bills. I was just curious if we were to go the direction that I think our Constitution requires of single subject, we'd have more fiscal notes, but they'd be briefer fiscal notes. I'm just curious, process-wise, the analysis, it's same amount of analysis, but putting it in different things, either in more smaller fiscal notes and so on. is there a time differential you'd expect if you had, say, 100 fiscal notes to do on 400 topics versus you have 400 fiscal notes on those same 400 topics?
Thank you. That's a great question, Mr. Larson.
Chair Toss and Senator Marty, thanks for the question. So I don't think so. I think most of the fiscal notes we get are pretty much single subject requests that that when it gets to the omnibus bill time, even if we get a request on an omnibus bill, it's usually, can you tell us the cost of this particular piece of it? And so pretty much the volume we have now is on kind of a single subject.
Thank you for that answer. My wife calls the omnibus bills on the bus bills where everybody gets on board. So anyway.
Can be very true.
Yes.
Appreciate it. You know, I think one thing we as a commission ought to consider, the session comes up fast in January. And the members of this commission, several won't be here next year. It takes time to appoint new members, get them engaged and involved, do all of that. And certainly it is that. But I think as we ought to consider some legislation that we could maybe put together. I don't know that it has to, I would say it might be done better if we considered that. It's not necessarily binding on the future commission, but it is certainly the prerogative of us to make that recommendation, to even prepare to do that kind of work. I think that would be very appropriate. It is common for us to have done that and to maybe consider that. It might be good to have a meeting in that regard to consider that. I want to put it on the table for discussion of us as members to consider doing that.
Thank you for that question. Any other comments or ideas regarding that suggestion? Senator Wickland.
I mean, I think in general, I guess I'd like to know more specifically about, you know, what type of thing you're talking about bringing forward. I guess I would be open to having a discussion, knowing that the commission will be made up of different people next year. It's hard to put forward something and say it's representative, but it also could help new people, you know kind of where things are at in the process. So I guess reviewing that, it would be, I would be possibly be interested in that. I'd also like to know if there's a way we could get maybe some information about how the work that's going to be done on the tax expenditure review commission side or board, I'm not sure what sort of entity it is. I mean, it sounds like it will affect the staff that are currently working on fiscal notes and what they do. I guess I'd like to have an understanding for this commission more about how that work will progress and how the interaction between, you know, this commission and any other group that's legislatively reviewing the results of the tax expenditure review process.
Yeah,
and I think that would be helpful. I'm sorry, that would be helpful, I think, before we get into session, so people have an understanding of kind of what the workflow is supposed to be and how this commission would be involved.
Sure. And thank you, Senator Wickland. I would concur with that. As you heard Mr. Larson testify, we've got some room to hire additional staff to take on that workload. And I think all of us received kind of weekly, if not bi-weekly updates on the fiscal note process, the number that have been coming in, the number that have been processed. And we always see committee deadline as kind of the clog in the plumbing, so to say, as if there's a rush to get things produced and meeting committee deadlines. So as expected, anybody who likes to look at numbers or graphs, it's very clear that once committee deadline passed, that the volume of fiscal notes significantly drops and changes the dynamics in the office per se. So, but I think those are great comments and something that we need to look into further and see if we can further discuss that.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
In regards to that question by Senator Wickland, Representative Noor and I had authored legislation. I would probably start from that legislation and consider that. I think that was mainly, I think some of the areas, so I just thought I'd give you an idea as to that. The other thing, Mr. Chair, is I think some of the LBO staff are here today. And I think it'd be really nice if we gave them an opportunity to stand up, introduce themselves, and maybe say their subject areas since they've taken the time to be here.
Well, that wasn't on the agenda, but I think it's a great idea. So with that, why don't we open it up and allow members maybe just in line to go ahead and stand up and introduce yourself and tell us what you're an expert about.
Good morning, members. My name is Alyssa Holtzman-Rosas. I'm one of the lead budget analysts with the LBO and I'm for education and higher education.
Thank you.
Morning, chair members. My name is Carl Whitaker, I'm lead analyst as well. Previously reviewed health and service fiscal notes, transition over to tax control.
Good morning, Tim. When we start on new hire, name is Susan Watts. I'm the tax expenditure.
Good morning, I'm Joel Enders, tax analyst with Tax Expenditure Review Committee, and I'll also be doing a Department of Revenue fiscal notes for the LPS.
Good morning. I'm Karen too, and I'm fairly new, and I just kind of got in on the end of last session, but my policy areas are court and corrections.
Thank you.
Hello, members. I'm Jim Carlson. I'm one of the lead analysts. I cover the areas of agriculture, environment, and housing.
Thank you so much. Any others?
I'm Catherine Ho. I'm the coordinator for the LBO. I assign the fiscal notes and take care of this commission and the tax expenditure review commission as well.
Thanks. And it should be noted that the Tax Expenditure Commission has been meeting and is just starting to get wheels. Well, we do have retiring members. Senator Kiffmeyer, we have prepared a certificate for you for your contributions to this commission. We also have one for Senator Rosen, who's retiring, Representative Albright retiring, and I'll leave this to Ms. Ho to get those to their respective offices. And I did not formally announce a retirement during the regular session. I had fully intended to serve another term, and there were some personal circumstances and a number of deaths in my social sphere that kind of was a wake-up call to me. I've served 20 years serving the public, 10 years in local government, and 10 years here in the legislature. And I just decided that it was maybe time to pass the torch. And so although I had my affidavit of candidacy all filled out and had fully intended to resolve the issue of redistricting, I decided to not file. So with that, I have enjoyed working with everybody here. And Representative Elkins, you and I have had several good spirited conversations, and Representative Noor as well, and members of the Senate. So I thank you. And so I am retiring also. And so there'll be next year a new chair. And I think Representative Scott probably will remain as one of the Republican members of the commission, but there should be probably two more from the Senate and another one replacing my participation. So for that, I thank all of you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And with that, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
I think we ought to maybe dust that off and take a look at, especially in the light of.
Signed by all of us.
Thank you so much.
You're me.